In the heart of the vast green plains of Kalunda, life moved slowly, gently, and predictably. It was the kind of village where everyone knew everyone, a place where children played barefoot in the dusty paths. Women shared stories while pounding yam, and elders sat beneath the ancient baobab tree discussing the old days. But behind the peaceful songs of birds and the smell of fresh cassava in the air, Kalunda held something else, something that no one saw coming. In this quiet village, gossip moved faster than fire on dry grass. A single whisper could circle the entire village before the sun reached the top of the sky. But not even the sharpest tongue or nosiest ear was prepared for what was about to unfold. This is not just a tale. It is a storm wrapped in silence, a lesson hidden in heartbreak, and a mystery that would shake every soul in Kalunda. It begins with two people, Zalifa and Cambo. Zalifa was the kind of woman every mother prayed for in a daughter-in-law. She was gentle, calm, respectful, and carried a heart so pure that even the most bitter village women had nothing bad to say about her. Her smile was like morning sunshine, and her presence brought warmth to every space she entered. People said she had the hands of a healer and the soul of an angel. Cambo, on the other hand, was known for his strong build, booming voice, and respected family name. He was a palm wine tapper with a proud reputation, a man who walked with his chest high and spoke as if the earth moved when he did. He had charm, no doubt, but under that charm was a fire, one fueled by pride, impatience, and the need to control. When Zalifa and Cambo got married, the whole village celebrated. The drums beat louder than ever before, and many said their union would be one of peace and prosperity. But what the villagers didn't know was that behind Cambo's charming smile was a deep-rooted temper, one that was waiting for the right moment to explode. And soon, that moment would come, not quietly, but with a sound that would echo through every ear in Kalunda. It started small, as it always does. A raised voice here, a slammed door there, a cold stare across the dinner mat. But slowly, like a dark cloud creeping over the horizon, Cambo's true nature began to show. Yet Zalifa, with all her grace, endured it silently. She wore her pain like a second skin, smiling even when her heart was breaking. The villagers, unaware of what happened behind the compound walls, continued to praise their perfect couple. But the storm was coming. A moment was near that would change everything. A single act, a slap, would turn love into shame, respect into mockery, and peace into chaos. And from that moment, the tale of Kalunda would never be the same again. This was not just the story of a woman and a man. It was the story of karma, of strength in silence, of rising from ashes, and of how the one you hurt today might be the one the whole world honors tomorrow. Zalifa was the kind of woman who made even the birds pause to listen when she spoke. Her voice was soft like the morning breeze, her laughter gentle like flowing water, and her presence brought calm wherever she went. Everyone in Kalunda loved her, not just for her beauty, but for the kindness that poured from her like sunlight. She would help the elderly carry firewood, comfort crying children, and offer herbs to anyone feeling ill. Her father, Emani, was a simple basket weaver, a quiet man whose hands were rough from years of work, but whose heart was full of love for his only daughter. Her mother, Nyoka, had been a healer, a woman whose knowledge of roots and leaves saved many lives. But Nyoka had passed on when Zalifa was just a child, leaving behind only her spirit and strength in Zalifa's heart. Growing up without a mother wasn't easy, but Zalifa never let sadness harden her. She grew into a woman who valued peace, who believed in love, and who treated everyone with respect, even those who didn't deserve it. So when Cambo came into her life, the village rejoiced. Cambo was strong, tall, and carried the pride of his well-known family. His father had been a respected elder, and his family compound stood near the village square, a symbol of status and tradition. Cambo was a skilled palm wine tapper, and his name carried weight among the villagers. When Cambo asked for Zalifa's hand in marriage, people whispered that it was a blessing for her. Some even said, "Zalifa is lucky, she will live in comfort and wealth now." Others said, "Zalifa's softness will calm Cambo's fire. She will bring peace to his restless spirit." The wedding was grand. Drums echoed across the hills. Women danced in colourful wrappers, and elders offered their blessings with kola nuts and prayers. Everyone believed this was a perfect match, but no one saw what was hiding behind Cambo's charming smile. Behind that smile was pride sharper than a knife, and a temper that burned hotter than dry season heat. At first, everything seemed fine. Cambo would walk proudly beside Zalifa in the market. He would laugh loudly, speak sweet words, and show her off like a trophy. But when the doors of their home closed, the real Cambo emerged. He was impatient, always looking for faults. If food was slightly late, or if the soup had less salt, his voice would rise. He didn't hit her at first, no, but his words, sharp, cruel, and heavy, cut deeper than any cane. Zalifa, ever gentle, bore it all in silence. She told no one, not her father, not her friends. She believed love could change him, that kindness would soften him. But Cambo's heart grew harder, not warmer. The villagers still saw them as a happy couple. They had no idea that every smile Zalifa wore was hiding pain, that every greeting she gave was covering bruises no one could see. She walked with grace, cooked with love, and served her husband with respect, even when he returned it with coldness and cruelty. Still, she endured. But the storm was brewing. Cambo's anger was growing day by day, and Zalifa's silence was slowly breaking her spirit. What no one knew was that soon the truth would come out in a way that would leave the whole village speechless. A moment was coming that would change everything, and when it happened, even the strongest tongues in Kalunda would run dry. At first, the days passed quietly in Cambo and Zalifa's household. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Zalifa rose before the sun, swept the compound, fetched water, cooked with care, and made sure everything looked perfect. She greeted neighbors with her warm smile, always polite, always graceful. But behind their compound walls, the warmth was fading fast. Cambo, who once showed her off with pride, now barely acknowledged her. His voice, once sweet and charming, had turned bitter and loud. It started with little things. He would complain about the taste of the food, the way she folded his clothes, or the sound of her footsteps. Zalifa, ever patient, tried her best to keep peace in the house. She listened, apologized, and worked harder. But it was never enough. One evening, after a long day, Zalifa served Cambo his meal, and he snapped. "Why is the food cold? Must I always repeat myself, Zalifa?" he shouted, banging his fist on the wooden table. Zalifa, startled, softly replied, "I'm sorry, Cambo. I was helping old Mamatida grind her millet. She wasn't feeling well, but that only made things worse." "Helping others while your husband suffers," Cambo barked. His eyes burned with rage, his voice rising so loud the neighbors paused their own conversations to listen. From that day, things grew worse. Plates began to fly. Doors slammed at every little argument. Cambo would throw things across the room and yell for hours. Zalifa endured it all. She never told anyone. She still smiled in public, still helped the sick, still showed respect to her husband. But inside, she was breaking. The whispers in the village started. Some neighbors noticed the sadness in her eyes. Others heard muffled arguments late at night, but no one dared speak. After all, Cambo was from a respected family, and Zalifa was too polite to say anything. But one day, everything changed. It was a sunny market day. The village square was full, traders shouting prices, women bargaining, children laughing and running around. Zalifa walked through the crowd, carrying a basket of vegetables. Suddenly, Cambo appeared. He was angry, furious, his face red with rage. He grabbed her basket and threw it to the ground, scattering everything. "What kind of woman are you?" he shouted, drawing everyone's attention. Zalifa looked at him, confused and embarrassed, her hands trembling. "You walk the market while my house is in chaos," he shouted again. Before anyone could react, Cambo raised his hand and slapped Zalifa across the face. The sound echoed through the square. Silence fell. Every eye turned, every mouth hung open. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Zalifa stood frozen, her face turned, her cheek burning. No one moved. No one spoke. The perfect couple, the one everyone praised, was now in the center of a public shame. What Cambo didn't realize was that with that one slap, he didn't just strike Zalifa. He struck his own reputation. He struck the pride of his family. He struck the trust of a whole village. That moment, that single act, would set in motion a series of events no one could have imagined. The pain, the shame, and the silence had finally burst into the open, and Kalunda would never be the same again. It was a bright and bustling morning in Kalunda. The village square was alive with noise and color. Women haggled over baskets of tomatoes, men laughed over fresh palm wine, and children chased each other between stalls. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted maize, spices, and ripe fruits. It was just another market day, full of life and joy. No one knew that in just a moment, all that noise would be swallowed by a silence so deep it would shake the village to its roots. Zalifa moved quietly between the stalls, her woven basket balanced on her arm, picking up vegetables and spices for the evening meal. She greeted every trader with her usual smile, soft and kind, even though her heart was heavy. Cambo had sent her to buy a few items and gave her some coins, but in the rush and distraction, she had forgotten to collect the change from one of the traders. She realized it too late. Just as she turned around, there he was. Cambo stormed through the crowd like a wild bull. His eyes were furious, his steps heavy. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care about the elders, the women, or the children. He walked straight to Zalifa, and before she could even speak a word to explain, his hand rose in the air. Slap! The sound rang louder than a drumbeat. His palm landed hard on Zalifa's cheek, forcing her face to turn from the impact. Her basket dropped, its contents spilling to the ground. The market froze. Traders stood still. Children stopped playing. Old women clutched their chests. Even the goats paused mid-bleat. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Zalifa stood still, her face burning with pain and shame. Her eyes were wide, not from the slap, but from the shock of being humiliated in front of the whole village. Her body trembled, but she said nothing. She simply bent down to pick up the scattered vegetables, tears silently falling onto the dust. Then, from the corner of the square, a tall, elderly man stepped forward. It was Papa Sefu, one of the oldest and most respected elders in Kalunda. His cane hit the ground with authority as he walked forward, his voice rising in anger. "Cambo, have you lost your senses?" he thundered. "You strike your wife in front of the ancestors, in the eyes of your people. Have you no shame?" But Cambo, proud and arrogant, didn't bow his head. Instead, he raised his voice and declared, "She's mine. I can do what I want with her." The crowd gasped again. Mothers shook their heads. Young boys looked at Cambo in disbelief. Even the elders murmured among themselves. This was no longer just a domestic issue. It had become a public disgrace. What Cambo didn't know, what he couldn't see in that moment of pride and rage, was that his actions had opened a door to judgment, to change, to consequences. That one slap, so careless, so cruel, would become the talk of every compound, every gathering, every evening fire. The village of Kalunda would never forget that day. And from that moment on, Cambo's life would begin to unravel in ways he could never imagine. That very night, after the shocking slap that silenced the village, something even more mysterious happened. Zalifa disappeared. The moon rose gently over Kalunda, casting soft silver light across the rooftops. But in Cambo's compound, there was an eerie stillness. Her usual humming was gone. The firewood by the kitchen remained untouched. Her water calabash still sat full by the doorway, as if she'd never touched it. Her slippers, those same worn slippers she wore every day, were neatly placed beside the mat, untouched, as though she had simply vanished into thin air. By morning, the entire village was buzzing. People gathered in clusters, whispering and pointing. The story spread faster than the smoke from the morning fires. "Zalifa is gone," the women at the stream said. "She must have gone to the river and thrown herself in," one murmured. "No," another said, shaking her head. "I heard she ran away in the night and went back to her father's hut." But when a few elders went to check on old Imani, they found him sitting outside his small hut, eyes red with tears, hands shaking. "She didn't come here," he said in a trembling voice. "I have not seen my daughter. She would never leave without telling me." Cambo, on the other hand, acted unfazed. "Maybe she ran off. Good riddance," he muttered coldly to those who asked. But even his voice carried a nervous edge. Deep down, even he didn't understand what had happened. He had expected her to cry and return, to beg for forgiveness, to carry on like always. But Zalifa was simply gone. And then, strange things began to happen. The wind around Cambo's compound became restless. Pots broke without reason. The goats grew unsettled, kicking and bleating all through the night. Neighbors began to hear whispers at midnight, soft, eerie whispers that made their skin crawl. Some swore they saw a shadow pass through the trees, tall and graceful like a woman in a flowing wrapper. Others claimed to hear soft footsteps near the river, but when they turned, no one was there. One morning, Cambo woke up to find his yam barn scattered. The strong ropes used to hold the yams were ripped as if by invisible hands. Birds hovered over his roof endlessly, cawing and crying, refusing to leave. Even the village priest, Baba Nyumu, came to him and said, "Something is not right. You have offended not just your wife, but the spirits watching over her. Still, Cambo remained proud, brushing off the warnings. All this is just coincidence, he scoffed. But the villagers weren't so sure. The peace in Kalunda felt disturbed, the air heavier, as though the ancestors themselves were restless. Children refused to walk near Cambo's compound. Women crossed to the other side of the path when they saw him coming. And all the while, Zalifa's absence hung in the air like smoke, thick, strange, and unforgettable. Where had she gone? Why had she vanished so suddenly? Was it fear, heartbreak, or something deeper? No one could say for certain, but one thing was clear. Her disappearance had not only shaken Cambo, but awakened something unseen in Kalunda, something powerful. Days slowly turned into weeks, but Zalifa was still nowhere to be found. And with her absence, strange things began to happen, things that could not be explained by nature or reason. Cambo's once thriving palm trees, which stood tall and green, began to wither. Their leaves drooped, the sap dried up, and no matter how hard he tapped, not a single drop of sweet wine flowed. And when it did, the taste turned bitter, so bitter that even the local drinkers spat it out in disgust. His animals too changed. The goats that once danced and played around the compound grew weak and thin. They refused to eat, no matter how much grass he brought. They simply stared off into the distance, as if they saw something no human could see. Chickens stopped laying eggs. The compound became quiet, eerily so, as if life itself was slowly draining away from Cambo's world. Then came the workers. One by one, they began to leave. First, it was Jato, his strongest tapper, who claimed he heard voices in the trees. Then, it was Lado, the stable boy, who ran away in the middle of the night, swearing he saw Zalifa's white wrapper floating near the barn. Even the young maidens who came to fetch water whispered among themselves, saying, "There's something wrong in that compound. A spirit lingers there." Cambo, once full of pride and arrogance, now sat alone on his stool, confused and restless. His friends no longer visited, and his neighbors kept their distance. Every corner of his life was turning to dust. One cold night, as the wind howled through the trees and the moon glowed high above, Cambo finally saw what others only whispered about. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, and there she was, Zalifa, not in flesh, but in spirit. She stood by the riverbank, her white dress flowing like mist, her eyes glowing softly in the darkness. Cambo's voice cracked as he whispered, "Zalifa, is that you?" She said nothing. She didn't move. She only stared at him, her lips curved into a quiet smile, calm, haunting, unforgettable. Cambo reached out in fear, but she vanished into thin air. From that moment, the village was no longer silent. Whispers grew louder and louder. Zalifa's spirit walks at night. She was too kind, too pure. The ancestors are angry. Karma has awakened. Even the elders nodded silently. Some said it was a curse. Others believed it was the spirits balancing justice. Whatever it was, everyone agreed on one thing. Cambo's downfall had begun, and it was no ordinary punishment. It was the hand of karma, moving silently, striking deeply. People stopped pitying Cambo. Instead, they watched him with fear. He had brought shame upon a good woman, and now, nature itself was turning against him. And so, the once proud man who slapped his wife in public now sat alone in a crumbling compound, haunted by shadows, whispers, and the consequences of his own cruelty. Cambo was no longer the man the village once knew. His shoulders, once broad with pride, now drooped under an invisible weight. His skin, once rich with color, turned pale and dry like cracked earth. His eyes were hollow, lifeless, as though the spirit inside him had faded. He walked through Kalunda like a ghost, avoiding the eyes of the people who once respected him, now only whispering behind his back. Even his own compound became cold and quiet. The laughter that once filled the air was gone. The wind that passed through seemed heavier, filled with the weight of guilt and regret. His neighbors kept their distance. Children ran away when they saw him coming. People crossed to the other side of the path rather than greet him. One day, his own mother, Mabula, who once praised him as the pride of their bloodline, stormed into his compound. Her eyes were fierce, her voice sharper than a spear. "You have brought shame upon us, Cambo," she shouted. "This is not bad luck. This is punishment. Punishment from the spirits, from the ancestors, even from the gods." Cambo tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He lowered his head like a child caught stealing. ashamed but too proud to admit the truth. Mabula's voice cracked with pain. You raised your hand against a woman who brought nothing but goodness into your life. Now, look around you. Everything is falling apart. The goats, the trees, the workers, even your own body is betraying you. And she was right. Cambo had started coughing at night. His bones ached. His dreams were filled with fire, shadows, and the silent stare of Zalifa. Every corner of the house reminded him of her laughter, her footsteps, her gentle singing as she cooked in the kitchen. But she was gone, and it was not just her presence that was missing. It was the heart of the village that felt empty without her. The sick ones, once healed by Zalifa's kind herbs, now suffered in silence. The old women missed her cheerful visits, the way she fetched water for them without being asked. The orphans especially sat by the trees every evening, hoping Zalifa would appear and tell them one more story, braid one more head, smile one more time. Even the women at the river talked about her. Zalifa was like sunshine in this village, one said. Now everything feels dark. People began saying that Kalunda itself was mourning her absence. The air felt heavier, the rains came late, the crops looked tired. It was as if the village spirit had vanished with Zalifa, leaving only the echo of her kindness behind. And Cambo, he could do nothing but sit on his mat, staring at the gate, hoping each footstep was hers. But she never came. And in that silence, in that emptiness, he finally realized he had not just lost a wife, he had lost a blessing, a gift, a heart that loved him when no one else would. But sometimes, realization comes too late, and redemption may not always be granted. On the 40th day after Zalifa's mysterious disappearance, Kalunda woke to a strange sound, the deep, thunder-like rhythm of drums echoing from the distant hills. Birds flew from trees, children stopped playing, even the wind paused, as if the land itself was holding its breath. People ran to the village square, wondering what was happening. A procession approached, warriors dressed in silver and blue robes, nobles in glittering garments, and guards on majestic horses formed a royal caravan the village had never seen before. The villagers stood still, eyes wide with awe. But what shocked them most was not the warriors or the horses. It was the woman riding at the center. There she was, a woman in flowing white robes, her skin glowing like the morning sun, her posture tall and graceful, her eyes sharp and commanding. Her face, it was Zalifa. Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that Zalifa?" a woman whispered, clutching her headscarf in disbelief. "No, it can't be. She looks like a queen." But it was her, the same Zalifa they had once known. Yet she was no longer the quiet, gentle girl who bowed her head in silence. She now carried the aura of royalty, her steps steady, her chin lifted, her presence powerful. Every eye followed her, every heart thudded with a mix of surprise, admiration, and guilt. She walked straight into the center of the square, the same place where she had once been slapped and humiliated. But this time, she stood tall, surrounded by warriors who guarded her like a precious gem. The drums stopped. Then an elderly woman, dressed in golden robes, stepped forward. It was the Queen Mother of Nyambira. She raised her voice for all to hear. "This woman you once shamed, we call her the Heart of Nyambira. When I found her, bruised and broken near our riverbanks, I saw more than pain. I saw purpose. Her kindness healed our land, her wisdom guided our counsel, and her spirit uplifted our people. She is now royal advisor and healer of the realm." The villagers were speechless. Some bowed their heads in shame. Others cried silently, overwhelmed by guilt and admiration. Zalifa turned to face them, her voice calm but filled with power. "I came back not to seek revenge, but to remind you, when you crush goodness, you curse yourselves. But when you honor the gentle, you bless your future." Everyone stood still. Even the wind seemed to pause again, carrying her words through the trees and into every heart. And Cambo stood at the edge of the crowd, his legs weak, his hands trembling. He could not speak. He could barely breathe. He had lost her once, and now he had truly lost her forever, not to death, but to destiny. Zalifa walked past him without a glance, her chin high, her spirit untouchable. The same hand he once raised against her could not even lift now to wave, and just like that, the girl he had broken had returned, not as a wife, but as a queen. Zalifa stood in the middle of the village square, the same place where her tears had once fallen, where her silence had once been mistaken for weakness. But today, Her voice rang clear, steady, and strong. The elders, the villagers, and even the children gathered around her, hanging on to every word, their hearts pounding with emotions they couldn't name. She raised her eyes and looked at the council of elders seated under the great baobab tree. They were the same elders who had once looked away when Cambo's temper flared, but now they looked at her with newfound respect, their heads bowed, ashamed of their silence in the past. Zalifa took a slow breath and stepped forward. "I did not leave because I was weak," she said softly, yet her words carried like thunder. "I left because sometimes, when you are buried in pain, you must rise somewhere else to bloom. I didn't disappear. I transformed." The crowd stood in complete silence. Even the birds seemed to pause in the trees. "I was taught to endure," she continued, "but endurance without dignity is not life. My silence was never fear. It was wisdom waiting for the right time to speak." Then she turned to face Cambo. The man who had once puffed his chest with pride now looked like a crumbling shadow. His head hung low, his hands trembled, and his knees weakened beneath him. He couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. Zalifa looked at him with calm power. "You taught me pain," she said, her voice unwavering, "but the universe taught me power. You broke me, but fate rebuilt me stronger than you could ever imagine. I no longer carry your shame. I walk with purpose." A hushed gasp moved through the crowd. No one had ever seen Cambo so silent, so defeated. Not because Zalifa insulted him, but because her dignity had risen so high, he could not reach her anymore. Then, the head elder, Baba Nduka, rose from his seat. His voice, old and deep, echoed across the square. "Let it be known across Kalunda and beyond. No woman shall ever be struck again without consequence. Let this be law. Let this be legacy." The villagers clapped. Some wept. Others chanted Zalifa's name. That day, her story didn't just touch hearts. It changed minds. Her pain had become a powerful path that lit the way for others. Children would grow up hearing her story, not just of a woman who was slapped in the market, but of a woman who stood tall in the end. Women began to walk taller. Men began to think deeper. And the village of Kalunda was never the same again. Zalifa didn't stay in Kalunda. She returned to Nyambira, where she continued her work as royal advisor, but her story remained in every home, whispered in every gathering, sung in every festival. She had gone from being a simple wife to a symbol of strength, and her voice became a flame that no one could ever silence again. But the winds of fate had not finished with Cambo. Just when he thought things could not get any worse, a fierce storm struck Kalunda one dark night. The wind howled like an angry spirit, lightning cracked the sky, and thunder roared across the village. When morning came, Cambo stood in the middle of his palm wine fields. Everything was gone. The trees he once tapped with pride were broken, the leaves scattered, and the soil washed away. That was the final blow. His last source of income had vanished overnight. Not long after, his only remaining goat fell ill and died. With nothing left to his name, Cambo began to wander around the village, ragged and hungry. He begged for food at the same market square where he had once raised his hand to slap Zalifa. The same spot where he had shouted in arrogance now became the place he sat in silence, his hand stretched out in shame, hoping for a few crumbs. The villagers watched in silence, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "Karma never forgets." Mothers pointed him out to their sons and daughters as a warning. "Let Cambo be your lesson," they'd say. "The hand that slaps in pride shall one day stretch in shame." But fate had another twist, a powerful one that left the whole village speechless. One bright morning, a group of well-dressed people arrived at the village, carrying baskets of herbs, healing tools, and colorful cloths. At their center stood Zalifa, radiant and graceful, no longer the shy woman people once pitied. She had returned not just as a royal advisor, but with a mission to give back, to heal, and to build. She announced the construction of a grand healing house, a place where people could come for treatment, guidance, and comfort. And the most shocking part? She built it right on the same piece of land that once belonged to Cambo. The land he had once used for pride and wealth was now used for healing and kindness. The villagers could hardly believe it. The same woman who had once cried silently in the shadows of Cambo's house now stood tall, commanding respect and spreading light. She didn't come back with revenge in her heart. She came back with purpose. People whispered in awe, "This is true strength, not loud, not bitter, but powerful." Zalifa never mocked Cambo, never insulted him. She simply rose so high that his pride crumbled beneath her success. She became the face of dignity, the voice of wisdom, and the spirit of true healing. While Cambo became a walking reminder, not just of cruelty, but of how life turns. And so, Kalunda changed forever. People remembered the story not just for the pain, but for the power of rising above it. Zalifa's name became a symbol, her journey a legend passed down through songs and stories. And Cambo, he faded into silence, a lonely figure by the market wall. A man once feared, now forgotten. A man who had everything, until he lost the most precious thing of all, respect. And that's how karma walked into Kalunda, not with thunder, but with quiet justice. If this story touched your heart, then remember, sometimes silence speaks louder than anger, and dignity is the strongest answer to cruelty. Zalifa's journey is a reminder to every woman and every soul that pain does not define you, rising above it does. No matter how dark the storm, light always finds its way back. And just like Zalifa, you too can turn your scars into strength and your tears into triumph. Let this story be more than just a tale. Let it be a lesson that pride fades, but kindness lives forever. A lesson that those who hurt others may laugh today, but tomorrow they might sit in the dust of regret. And a powerful reminder that true revenge is not hatred, it is healing, growth, and rising so high that those who broke you can no longer reach you. If this story moved you, please don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss more powerful stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and always remember, no matter what life throws at you, never let anyone dim your light. Keep shining, keep rising.